Hey y'all, I'm Dr. Lucretia Cook, but you can call me Dr. Lala. Welcome back to another episode of the Re3Volve Podcast, where grief and loss are a journey and not a final destination. And so today I would like to talk about boundaries. Yep, boundaries. Let's talk about what they are and what they are not, right? Because so many of us think of boundaries and we think of them as walls, punishments, or ultimatums. And boundaries are none of those things. They are actually acts of self-care that protect us emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. They help protect our well-being. And a lot of folks misunderstand them as something that we use to control other people. But boundaries are actually things that we set to govern our own actions. Boundaries help to clarify what we will and will not allow, what we will and will not participate in, and how we show up in our relationships. So let's talk about it. So let's start by defining what a boundary is. A boundary is a form of self-care, a personal guideline for your behavior, a way to protect peace and emotional safety, a tool for clarity, not control. So let's go a little deeper. A boundary is a self-governing guideline. That's how we manage ourselves, not other people. It tells folks how we will act, respond, or engage in a particular situation. Boundaries are not about forcing other people to change. I know. It's not about other people changing. Boundaries are about how we are going to show up in any particular situation. Setting boundaries help us to protect our energy, our healing, and emotional capacity. Yeah. Boundaries are all about you, not the person you're engaging with. I know that's something to think about, right? Because for so long, I also had that misunderstanding. But boundaries aren't about the other person. When I set boundaries, it's about what I'm setting for myself, how I'm going to manage myself. And so boundaries help us to create clarity, not conflict. So now that we've talked about what boundaries are, let's talk about what they are not. Boundaries are not control. They're not punishment. They're not manipulation. They're not rejection. And they're not selfish. Yep. Just sit with that for a moment, because it's not. Boundaries aren't selfish. And I think it's important that we recognize that, because so many of us avoid setting boundaries because we're afraid of being seen as selfish, being seen as mean or unloving. But boundaries aren't punishments. They're not a way to control the next person's behavior. And you setting a boundary isn't rejecting someone that you're in community with. It's not rejecting someone that you love. And more importantly, they're not an emotional weapon. A boundary isn't something that should be used to punish someone, to weaponize against them. Boundaries are more about creating clarity so that people are clear about what you need. And not just so people will be clear about what you need, but so that you will be clear about what you need. About what you need to stay healthy, grounded, and safe. And here's the reality. Once you recognize what you need, once you're clear about what your needs are, it'll be easier to express your needs to other people. And so let's talk about why boundaries matter so much in our healing. And there are a couple of reasons. They help to protect our emotional energy. They help to reduce feelings of being overwhelmed. Certainly, they may prevent feelings of resentment. They help to clear our mental so that we have more clarity. It helps offer that type of support. And also creating boundaries creates space for us to rest. Because healing requires space. Emotional, mental, and spiritual. Because the truth of the matter is, when we don't set boundaries, a lot of times folks will overextend, overgive, overfunction. You wind up doing too much, taking on obligations that aren't yours, taking on responsibility that you don't have the capacity to fully give 100% to. And you know what happens when we do that? It usually leads to resentment. You wind up exhausted. Sometimes you wind up burned out. And so when we set boundaries, it helps us to create more margins for when we need rest. Right? Reflection, restoration. Boundaries help us to set those perimeters. And then they help us to stay aligned with our values and our healing journey. Yeah, that's something to think about. Boundaries help us to do those things. And so I know you're wondering, if boundaries are so important, why are they so hard to set? That's a good question, isn't it? Well, I am glad you asked. As a reformed people pleaser, someone who is still currently in treatment, I can tell you what some of the barriers to setting boundaries are. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of it causing conflict. Fear of being misunderstood. Guilt and obligation. And quite honestly, sometimes these are learned patterns of overfunctioning. And most of us have felt at least one of those things. Some of us have felt all of them at some time or the other. The truth is, a lot of folks have a hard time setting boundaries because they fear the emotional fallout. They don't want folks to be mad at them or there to be conflict. And throughout life, especially depending on your role in your family, sometimes you feel obligated to always be available. Not only do you feel obligated, but folks also believe that's what you're supposed to do. So you're not only fighting with this obligation, this self-obligation that you have, but also the feelings of obligation that you have to others. And their feelings that this is also what you're supposed to do. It's what you've always done. Why do we need to change now? This works for us. It's working. It works for us. But you're slowly falling apart. Right? Some folks grew up in environments where boundaries weren't modeled. You grew up in environments where your parents were constantly go, 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 go. As a PK, I can tell you, we grew up that way. Someone always needed something. My parents always needed to go somewhere. No wasn't in their vocabulary. So that was definitely something we, my siblings included, have had to learn. But being able to name these barriers help us to be able to move through them. And it's important that you also have compassion for yourself as you learn to do these things. Because I'll be honest with you, it's not comfortable. It's not. It's not easy to say no. It's not easy to disappoint people, because sometimes a boundary may means that someone gets disappointed. It's not easy to do that. And so then we have to work on ways, learn how to do it. So let's explore what healthy boundaries look like in real life. So some examples of a boundary may be, I'm not available for that conversation. Someone wants you to do something and you already have too much on your plate. You might say, I can't take that on right now. Or someone has sent you a detailed list of questions. It may be that you have to tell them, I'm going to need time to respond to this. Or there's someone who consistently engages in negative conversations, negative attitude, and you may tell them, I'm choosing not to engage in negativity. Or there's someone that you love dearly, but they like to gossip. And that's not something you want to participate in. A boundary looks like saying, hey, I'm not participating in gossip. Let's find something else to talk about. All of those are examples of boundaries because you're not telling them what they have to do or what they need to do, but you're telling them what your capacity is, how you can show up in the engagement. Healthy boundaries are clear, simple, and rooted in self-respect. They don't require some long explanation or emotional justification. No. You don't have to explain why. And that can be a challenge learning to do that. Stating your limitation without giving some 15-minute explanation. They don't. But boundaries communicate your limits. Again, these statements are not about controlling other folks. Boundaries are about how we govern ourselves and our own participation when we engage with people. Yeah. This is all about you. And scripture gives us framework for boundaries. I know it's amazing to me how much we can find in the Word of God if we look for it. And it consistently affirms the importance of boundaries. Proverbs 4:23, it teaches us to guard our hearts. Not in fear, but in wisdom. It reads to guard your heart above all else. Jesus modeled boundaries for us. And in Luke 5:16, it talks about how he withdrew to rest and pray. Yes, that was him modeling a boundary because he had to withdraw from the crowd to rest and pray. Yeah, so he had to take the initiative to remove himself from that environment. Right? And then in Matthew 5:37, Brother Matthew told us to let your yes be yes and your no be no. He said, be clear about it. Don't leave any middle room. And the yes or a no is enough. And I'll tell you what, I heard something the other day that really blessed me. I heard someone say that they have taken on the thought that my yes did not require an explanation when I gave it. And because my yes doesn't require an explanation, don't be asking me for one with my no. Oh, that blessed me. Because how true is that? As long as we're saying yes, people don't have no questions. But the moment you say no, then they want an essay on why you're saying no. But if you can accept my yes without explanation, be able to accept my no. That was good to me. It was. And so what I'm saying here is that boundaries can be found in the Bible. Setting boundaries are healthy, and sometimes they are quite necessary for you and for the folks you're in community with. They're necessary. So, how can therapy play a role in helping us to build and maintain boundaries? Identifying unhealthy patterns, naming emotional needs, releasing guilt, building communication skills, and practicing assertiveness. Yep. Therapy helps us to understand where our boundary struggles come from. Because listen, if you grew up in a household where boundaries weren't a thing, learning to set boundaries is going to be a challenge. And mine now, I said it's a challenge. I didn't say it was impossible. It's something that can be learned. Therapy also gives us the language for our needs and tools for communicating them. It teaches us how to say what we need to say. Right? Being in therapy helps us to release the guilt and sometimes shame around saying no. Sometimes we feel guilty about saying no. Sometimes we may feel ashamed because we had to say no. Saying no was necessary. May be shameful for some of us. And also, therapy empowers us. It empowers us to set boundaries from a place of clarity and not fear. Yeah. There is so much to be learned and gained in therapy. So now let's talk about how boundaries support emotional safety and peace. Well, for one, boundaries create emotional safety by reducing chaos and unpredictability. Because you've already defined how you're going to behave in a situation. So you don't have to worry about getting caught up in drama because folks were gossiping, because you already know you didn't participate in that. Right? They help us to regulate our nervous system by reducing stress and overwhelm. Because you don't have to be stressed about what's going to happen, because you've already decided that you're not going to do it. Or you've already decided how you're going to respond. So it takes away the guesswork. Because you've already told them, I'm not going to be able to take that on right now. You've already made that decision. They help to protect your peace and strengthen relationships by creating clarity and mutual respect. Because now folks already know what to expect from you. Because you've already told them, right? Now, I will say it's important that we show up consistently, right? But boundaries are not barriers. Barriers can actually serve as a bridge to healthier connections. So as we close today, I would like for you to consider, where do you need to set or strengthen a boundary in your healing journey? Because your boundaries are acts of love for yourself and for others. And so remember, Boundaries aren't selfish. They're not. Boundaries help us to protect what God is healing in us. Okay? You're not being selfish by setting boundaries. And so until next time, keep choosing healing. Keep choosing joy. I love y'all. Bye.